lot of people talking about changes, looking for new gigs. It's actually really relevant for Nick's presentation. He talks about, he'll tell you in more detail, but talks about changes that he's gone through in his life that led him to meditation and mindfulness, and it's actually really interesting. So I'd love to welcome Nick up here. If you're not familiar with his background, he produced the show Border Wars for National Geographic for, I don't know, 10 years or something. I'm making that number up. I don't know how many it actually was.
It only felt like 10 years.
Yeah, it was 6 months. But Nick, thank you again for coming out. It's a pleasure having you every year. And
thank you.
Thank you. So everybody, round of applause.
I'm going to ask you a question. Be ready for it.
Shoot.
Yeah. So don't go to the bathroom. Don't go to the bathroom. Yeah. All right. Well, Happy New Year, everybody. It's all true that if I look familiar, it's because I've been on this stage before, very much at this time slot, as we used to say in television. The first time was January 6, 2017, which was 2 years ago. Back then, I called this thing I was doing Innovation and Meditation Mindfulness for Stressed Out Entrepreneurs, and I can only imagine you're all back and could be described in that way. It was very helpful. As a matter of fact, we started a mindfulness group here through Cross Campus, which maybe we'll do again sometime, and it was great to be able to follow up with folks and give them a chance to do this work and do this practice. If you were here 2 years ago, you may find yourself in this photograph. Look very closely and see if you recognize yourself. The next time was last year, January 5th. What I did last year was something called Practical Ways to Have a Practice, and it really was nuts and bolts. It was really about how do you start a practice, how do you maintain a practice, how do you sustain a practice, how do you go back to the practice you quit and get back on the wagon and so forth. And I brought my dog with me. This is Bodhi, the meditating dog, and people ask me all the time, how in the world did I train him to be able to do this? Well, you can't give away all your secrets, so the truth is, if you see this dog, you'll know one thing, it's going to be time to meditate, and that's all I will tell you. So, here we are, right now, right here in the present moment. Now, today I'm going to do something different. Mike and I talked about what I do today, and I said, well, I have a brand new keynote address. It's an hour-long keynote address that I've been developing. It's taken quite a lot. It's been like making another TV show because it's a media-rich thing that it is. And I've done it in conjunction with the National Geographic Speakers Bureau, and the name of that show is Border Wars, From Mayhem to Mindfulness. And it's a talk I've wanted to do for a while. I used to give all kinds of keynote addresses to law enforcement. And I used to just do border wars for cops. Cops love border wars. If you're a cop in Cincinnati or some other place, you know, what we did at the border is what you do, but exotic, you know, and they just can't get enough of it. But I really want to tell more of the bigger picture, tie it into what happened to me, what happened to my crew, and also tie it into what I do now, because I'm a mindfulness teacher and meditation teacher. So you can't put an hour-long talk into this amount of time we have this morning, so I'm going to do a bit of a shortcut, you'll see, but the talk starts out something like this. Hello, I'm Nick Stein. Today, this morning, I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey. I'm going to take you to the heart of the U.S.-Mexican border, but I'm going to do it in a way that's a little unorthodox and really quite intimate. I'm going to take you there and let you see the border through my eyes. And what I mean is, through the experiences and the reactions and the feelings I had while working within law enforcement, being embedded with law enforcement for over 4 years. Now, I had the privilege of doing that because I was hired by the National Geographic Channel to make Border Wars. Now, many of you may have heard of it. It was a rather big hit show for the channel. As a matter of fact, when it premiered, it was the highest rated premiere in the history of the channel, which is like being shot out of a cannon. We did 4 shows, and next thing you know, they wanted 8 shows, and then 10 more shows, and 12 more shows. We ended up doing 60 episodes, and I spent over 4 years down there seeing really horrendous things. I mean, it was sort of the best of times and the worst of times, and I'll get more into that later. To give you a feeling for the working conditions that my crew and I were immersed in, I've put together this little sizzle reel, or this is one I've found. It's a highlight reel. This is a quick reel that shows you some of the more intense moments. So let me give you a taste of what it was like for us on Border Wars.
Got the group under that tree right there. Oh my gosh.
We already got bodies running.
Abajo! Abajo! Hey! They're moving! Let's get you right! They're spreading all out. You get what you can.
I'm telling you, these guys are good.
They'll do anything to get their drugs up north.
They try to hide it, and we try to find it.
Come to me. Oh yeah.
498 in the area.
The violence is in the towns. It's already here.
They're going to be waiting for us. They're going to be armed.
Then goddamn it, talk to me.
They don't give it who they sell to. All they know is that they're selling their and they're making their money.
So as you can see, making Border Wars was not for the faint of heart.
That was a sizzle.
That is your sizzle reel. Too hot to handle.
That's good producing.
Okay.
Okay, so we just had a false alarm. I was right in the middle of the talk. I just shown the sizzle reel, which is a hot reel of action down at the U.S.-Mexican border. And as soon as the film stopped, the alarm went off, and everyone had to evacuate the building. So we're gonna have to start again. Come on.
It was awful, but I stayed in the moment. I stayed in my meditative state, and now it's all gone away. So thank you, Nick, for helping me through this very difficult moment. Good job.
Stay calm. That's why we're here. Mindfulness and meditation. Good time to practice.
What the heck? This is another lesson in unpredictability, in impermanence. I mean, the lessons are actually boundless in terms of thinking. If you know what you're going to do, think again. There's an old saying, if you want to make God laugh, tell her your plans. So here we go. All right, so the question is, what in the world does Border Wars have to do with mindfulness? And there's an old saying, there's another unpredictable thing that just happened there. What does Border Wars have to do with mindfulness? Okay, the old saying is, a single picture is worth 1,000 words. So I'm going to show you a picture and you tell me what Border Wars has to do with mindfulness. This is me in El Paso in 2011. I call this a postcard from the edge. You're looking at a producer who's in trouble, doesn't even really know how much trouble he's in at this point. Help would come, but not for a couple of years, not till we wrap the show. Now, I didn't get into this trouble by myself. This is my crack television crew. But if you take a closer look, you can see they were about as far down the rabbit hole as I was. Now, we were into our jobs. We were adrenaline junkies. My co-producer in the field was Natalia Baldwin. She actually thought this was her very own Black Hawk helicopter. And Kevin Cunningham, I wish Kevin was here today, he lives nearby. Great sound man, he was with me from every frame of the show. Also a brilliant photographer, and I want to give him a shout out because many of the images you'll see today, Kevin took. Last but not least with Tony Puyo. Tony was my #1 cameraman. This is Tony far beneath the streets of Nogales in a freshly dug, freshly discovered cartel drug tunnel. Now, I've been in a lot of drug tunnels. Some of them are like Disneyland, you know. They have air conditioning and lighting and railroad tracks, and, you know, they're really pleasant. This drug tunnel wasn't. This was a kind of a rabbit hole. But he wasn't alone there. He was with Agent Hecht, who is known as a tunnel rat. Together, they were crawling through this tiny, tiny tunnel into Mexico. So there was never a dull moment. Now, I've been a television producer for over 40 years, and I don't do television anymore, but I basically was a professional storyteller. I did nonfiction television. I worked for all the major networks. I worked for all the major cable networks. But there's really only one story that I'm passionate about telling today, and that's the story of mindfulness. Mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness, the ideas behind mindfulness really, literally saved my life. If we had more time, I'd go into the details of why that statement is true. But it really saved my life because it gave me an inner life. This was something I'm not sure I even knew I had. If I had it, it was an abstract idea. I certainly didn't know how to find it, tap into it, and everything else. But let me be more specific. Mindfulness literally and fundamentally changed my relationship to my own thoughts and my cognitive process. It gave me a far better understanding of myself and this inner landscape that I mentioned. It pulled me, after border wars, from a serious and rather dangerous depression, and it can do that. It has the power to do that and to keep depression and anxiety at bay. And last but not least, it's rescued my marriage. And today I've been with my wife for 31 years. It also opened up another world for me. I didn't start for this reason, but I got so into it. I went to school for it at UCLA. I got certified back east. And today I teach mindfulness to a lot of different populations, but I'm honored and thrilled that I can do it with the same population that I got in so much trouble with, because that population is in trouble. Everyone here knows that cops have a really difficult job under unbelievable amounts of stress and have very few tools to cope with it because their coping mechanisms aren't very healthy. There's a lot of bad behavior and bad habits that cops have. I get the chance to work with federal law enforcement, this is Border Patrol, as well as local police departments. So, Mike, how much time do we have left?
How about 10 minutes?
Oh, we'll never make it. Okay, but
We'll try.
The reason I ask this is because if you try to take an hour-long talk and you put it in this tiny time slot, you have to have a trick, a little shortcut. So here's a shortcut. I have given this talk only twice. The big talk, Border Wars from Mayhem to Mindfulness. One was in my living room in front of 20 friends, which was very nice of them to come and help me work it out. And the next time I got to do it was late last year, the Ford Motor Company. They were kind enough to film it. So here's a 5-minute version of my talk, which you'll get a lot of the arc of the story. And here we go. For the next hour or so, I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey. I'm going to take you to the heart of the U.S.-Mexican border in a rather intimate way, a rather unorthodox way. I am going to
let you see the U.S.-Mexican border through my eyes. And here are just a few images that I'll share with you that kind of show you the everyday scenes and situations that we looked at. We wanted to communicate something about the human suffering, separation, and pain, which is at the heart of this controversial region. And so we talked to and we listened to the stories of the migrants that we came across, as well as the agents and officers that we were embedded with. This is a typical photograph, Tony and I. Tony got these drugs behind me, and he got it because he chased this car to the Rio Grande River, in which case the two smugglers jumped out of the car and swam back to Mexico. But Tony wasn't done for the day. Later in his shift, we did another story with him. It was another form of smuggling, only a whole different and far more intense story.
Yep, they're running. Okay, they're running out the back.
Policía, abre la puerta.
I heard movement, I heard movement.
Officers split up to search the house.
Boca abajo, boca abajo, boca abajo.
It's filled with illegal immigrants.
Dude, these conditions are horrible.
Yeah, it is.
This is ridiculous, man. Poor people, bro.
25 people in here, crowded into the small trailer. It's super hot. You can feel there's no AC. There's one little stall for all these people.
Women typically have it the hardest.
Women will frequently tell you that they were raped or they were beaten.
Now, I show you this for a reason, because this is the kind of thing that the men and women of law enforcement see all of the time. And believe me, it takes a toll on them. And you can see it in their faces and in their body English. My trauma came partly because of the PTSD I experienced at the border, but partly because it was corporate PTSD. It was something you all can relate to. Fox took over the National Geographic. Most of my colleagues were fired, and suddenly the new president of the network, the Fox president, loved Border Wars, renewed my show. You think, all right, well, this is traumatic, but it's all going to work out. Border Wars continues. But then what you don't know is that he replaced me as a series producer. Now, my job was to teach my replacement how to do my job. This is the infamous Laredo PD narcotics unit, kind of rogue guys. So now I'm in a very strange brew. So now I'm still down at the border. I'm still dealing with guns and drugs and money and violence, only this time it's mixed in with anger, depression, and anxiety. You all know that you don't have to jump out of a helicopter to get in trouble. The disappointments and the stress and the deadlines and the pressures at home and at work, easy to make you go sideways. Now at this point, my marriage is hanging by a thread. I have been gone for about 70% of 4 years, and I'm married to this beautiful woman, but we are in terrible shape. And at that point, my dad got sick, and then he died. So we're talking about a pretty rough time. So I started meditating, but I decided I'd try it for 1 week. And I was a mess, don't forget. And I thought, well, I'll give this a go. And if it didn't work, I'd just quit, because nothing was working. And then after a week, I had this shift, this sense of hope. Today, I teach law enforcement about mindfulness. In fact, what I do is I teach them about resiliency. What I teach is something called mindfulness-based resiliency training. So we meditate. So how do we do it? We're going to sit. We're going to feel into our bodies, right? Our mind can be everywhere and anywhere, but our bodies are here and our bodies are now. We're going to breathe, which is a point of focus, which is not the only one, but it's a great one. We're going to watch. We're going to observe. We're going to see what the heck is going on in there. And you're going to see it's a bit of a circus in there, but that's okay, as long as you're aware. And then we're going to begin again. That's meditation. Even if you don't learn to meditate, think about the weight of this word. As a human being, can you find a way to stop and just be, just for a few minutes a day? You can imagine it's about the only logical counterweight to the madness of our lives. And so I encourage you, I Thank you so much. It's been an honor talking to you today. And I appreciate it.
All right. So, given our current circumstances and our current time, I had a lot more to say about exactly the big ideas around mindfulness and meditation, but I think the time that we have left is best spent just trying it. So, let's sit in a way that has a sort of alert and dignified manner. That means really putting your butt in the chair, your feet on the ground, your back in a kind of a strong, upright presence. And we'll just do a short meditation, and I'll try to incorporate in my guided meditation some of the concepts that we were talking about before. And we'll do this for about 5 minutes, Mike, is that right? Yeah. Okay, good. All right, so if this is your first time doing it, don't worry, you'll survive. If you have done this in the past, I think you'll find a lot of these concepts and ideas and the very way in which we go about this, the intention we bring to it, to be both familiar and comforting. So here we go. First thing I will invite you to do is just feel what it's like to come to a full stop. From the moment you woke up this morning and used your 5 senses to navigate the world, to solve problems, to detect threats, you have been in full doing mode. And it's not easy when you come to the chair, the couch, or the cushion to suddenly tap the brakes and come into a full being mode. But doing this simple act of stillness can only be described as a radical act of self-care. So the first order of business is just feel the stillness in your body and feel the stillness in the room. So this practice does not ask us to clear our minds. It does not ask us to somehow suppress our thoughts. That is one of the great myths of meditation. And it's a terrible thing to think is going to happen because it's an invitation for failure. The mind has a mind of its own. You may have every good intention to sit quietly and down-regulate, but your mind has its own agenda. It didn't get the memo. And so we welcome all mental activity, but we change our fundamental relationship to that cognitive activity. And so we observe. Just check out what's going on with the body, with the mind, with the emotions, become an observer, become a scientist, and just feel what's happening on the inner landscape. Now, to help us in this regard, we do choose a point of focus. We do choose an anchor to help us gather our thoughts, help us come to the here and now, to come into the present moment. It's not easy. The power of the mind is strong, but we can see just how strong if we use an anchor point. Now, the classic one is the breath, but I would submit to you it's not the only one. I mean, the breath is part of the body, and truly it's the body as a whole, and it's focusing on different aspects of the body sensations, which is really our ally. The mind can be anywhere, but the body is here, and the body is now. So we can often start with this will be an abbreviated body scan. Feel your feet on the ground. Feel your shins and your calves and your knees, upper legs and pelvis. Strong back, soft front, torso. Down the arms to the hands and the fingers. And up from the shoulders, through the neck, to the top of the head. Full body scan. Feel the totality of your body sitting here. And then start to pay attention to the breath. Don't change it. Just feel what it's like to inhale through the nose. Unless you have a cold, use your nose. And feel what it's like to get curious and granular examination of the breath. And when the mind starts to wander, which it absolutely will, 100%, it's not a problem. There's no pejorative associated with it. When the mind wanders, and you wake up to the wandering mind, smile for this next opportunity for mindfulness, and simply come back to the breath. Let's just do that for 30 seconds. Okay. So you can open your eyes, come back into the room. So I'm just going to flip through these real quick. You can see what you're missing. Yeah, that's what we were going to do. We were going to do that. We did that. Just give you a feeling for mindfulness. It's really about attention training, but attention to what? The present moment. We did some of that. The here and now. Common myth. It's not about suppressing your thoughts in any way. It's really about observing and changing your relationship to your thoughts and moods. Really, it's about stillness, observation, and awareness. I love that graphic. I think it says it very well. And ultimately, it's getting a greater objectivity on your subjective reality. And what that means is when we go into this contemplative mode and we see the power of the mind, when we find our mind has wandered away from the breath, we then have a chance to understand exactly how we actually operate. And we begin to have the ability to see our thoughts arise, exist, and pass away. We can see our moods do the same thing. We can begin to understand that they are temporary, that you are the homeowner and these are simply visitors. And the reason we want to get some objectivity about our subjective reality is we don't want to be caught by it and seized and enslaved by our thoughts. This is true liberation. Mindfulness and meditation offer you away from the bondage of getting swallowed and run by your runaway thoughts. This is really right here is sort of the heart of what we're trying to do. And this is a great graphic. It says, stillness allows you to observe the inner workings of your mind. And when you do that, you discover something profound. And this is what it is. You are not your thoughts. This is a big deal for people who've never imagined that this would be true. The thoughts, again, are temporary electrical impulses, and if you identify with them too much, they can ruin you. You can see them. If you can see them, you are not them, right? The way I can see this bell here. If I am the subject, it is the object. I am not this. Same thing with our thoughts, feelings, and moods. The more you can get distance from them, the less they own you. Even the voice in your head, and we all have the voice in our head, right? Say to yourself your address, your home address. Just say it quietly to yourself. You hear that voice in your head speaking English? Okay. Let me ask you a question. Who's listening? Right? These are the sorts of things that a mindfulness practice can give you. This was when we were going to do a second mindfulness meditation. So I'm just going to finish with this. This is what I do. And since we network here, I will tell you, this is what I do. If you have any need for this, come talk to me. I also do public speaking. This is the talk I give now. And this is how to reach me. Thank you for your attention. Namaste.
Thank you, Nick. I'm sorry we had to cut that short with the fire alarm. I'll talk to the city afterwards. That was actually really fantastic. We're going to open up to Q&A. I'm going to pass the microphone to John. If you have a question, raise your hand. If you have a comment or story about your own stressful situation, let's talk about that later. I'd like to start off the questions. Sure. I have a question. Because you didn't get into your background with border wars, the thing that I've always found fascinating, I've known you now for 3 or 4 years, is the stress of producing a show and being at the border with the agents and these people. That's a very stressful situation, but it was the corporate change that pushed you over the edge. Yeah. And so can you talk a little bit about what that because I think that's very relevant to the entrepreneurs here, people working in corporate, the corporate refugees, that's the very relevant piece. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. That's one reason I included it in the talk, because I know I want to give this talk into a lot of different populations. And when I got to Ford, it was really relevant. They really resonated with that idea. And sure enough, National Geographic, a lot of people don't understand this, was owned by Fox. Rupert Murdoch Fox, the 20th Century Fox. They were the business partners. They were the ones who did distribution. They were the big investors. But nobody was going to tell National Geographic, which has been around since 1886, I think, how to do the editorial side of the shop. And that was unthinkable. There was a big firewall there, and that firewall had been there for about 12 years, until the day the firewall went down. And Fox decided that they'd had enough of National Geographic programming the channel, and they came in and basically started firing people left and right. It was really a shocker. Imagine a venerable organization like Nat Geo suddenly having a hostile corporate takeover from their business partner, is essentially what it was. So everyone I knew got fired, everybody I worked with got fired, and I thought, fine, we've done 50 shows. That was more than I ever imagined. Border Wars had been kind of a bucket list, checked off a whole lot of things on there. And then I found out that, the new Fox president wanted to renew the show, but he's sure he could make it better, even though it had been one of their biggest hits. And so he replaced me as a showrunner, and then he literally told me my new job was to teach my replacement. Now, to say that was an ego-crushing experience, to say that was just maddening, a sense of betrayal, and so forth. But you know what? It's interesting, because no trauma, no corporate trauma for me, no mindfulness, right? I was desperate. By the time I crawled out of there, that final terrible season in Border Wars, in which the new producers really wrecked the show in many ways, I can't even start to tell you, but the ratings took a dive and all the things we predicted would happen happened. By the time I crawled away from there, I was really on broken glass. My marriage was a wreck. And I went off to Montreal, of all places. I got a crazy phone call in the middle of a drug raid asking me if I wanted to come to Montreal, and I took it because I knew I had to go someplace and figure it out. Well, mindfulness really did give me the ability to find out how to self-regulate, how to take these maddening thoughts, how to take these toxic feelings I had, the anger, the depression, the anxiety, and gave me a tool, gave me a way to work with it. I can't really imagine any other process that would have done the same. My wife's a therapist. She's a great therapist. I believe in therapy, and when I need to, I go to therapy. But if I had just been talking about my problems, I'd still be having these problems, I'm pretty sure. But mindfulness just gives you kind of a lifeline to find out really what it is that makes you think like this, that makes you hold on to your toxic thoughts like this. What is it that feeds you about them? And so this can happen to all of you and any of you. I mean, particularly entrepreneurs, you really have a lot of ups and downs. You have a whole lot of expectations. Somebody comes along, they're excited about what you're doing. You have visions of funding, you have visions of distribution, you have visions of all your problems going away, and one email later, it's all gone. Right? How do you deal with those disappointments and those sways? Well, you've got to have a tool. If you go to the cushion, if we say, you go to the chair to meditate, that's a place where you can really discover what kind of courage you have. Because when you're hurting inside, when your jaw is tense and your heart is aching and your stomach's in knots, this is a chance to actually, and this sounds counterintuitive and not terribly pleasant, but it works. You lean into the pain. You lean towards the fire. Because when you do, you find out that you can break it down like the breath into a more granular way. If it's a pain, you can see it's not a monolithic thing. It fluctuates. It goes high, low, it goes hot, cold, it goes smooth, rough. And after a while, you begin to realize it is just energy moving through your body. You begin to deconstruct it, and it gets less and less power. So that's just a quick way of telling you what it is that you can do when you bring your pain to the cushion.
Hi, my name is Sophie. Thank you so much. That was amazing. I love that.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, what will it take to bring more mindfulness to corporations? Have you found any way of speaking to corporations that makes them curious or want to bring you in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have one really consistent corporate client, and I met them right here in this room, and we have one of the members of the Cellbrite team with us here, and is right a few blocks away. And I've become their mindfulness coach. I'm there every other week. One of my favorite things is when the head of the company tells me it actually helps with recruitment, that they tell people they have a mindfulness coach. it is sweeping the country in terms of adaptation for corporations. I mean, you know, Silicon Valley has a big footprint in this. Ford, the reason I went to Ford is that Mr. Ford, Bill Ford, the great-grandson of Henry Ford, is a meditator. There was no accident. I got to do my talk there. It's not easy. I mean, they're definitely, I've had long conversations with corporations that are very excited, but nothing really happens. You end up in a cul-de-sac. But when I do get in there, and sometimes I've done one-offs, kind of like today, you know, I tell them there's some very simple things to bring a mindfulness culture into their company. You know, one thing is as simple as have a moment. Let's say you have meetings, right? Most companies have endless meetings. If you were to have 1 or 2 minutes of silence with people turning their phones off before every meeting, say of 5 people or longer, you'd really then have everyone in the room actually in the room. And you would create immediately a corporate. Now, you may get some people rolling their eyes and not wanting to do it, but after a while, they'll get used to it, and they just come in and they breathe, and then you go about your business. Having a quiet room at a company is really important, because the first thing people will tell you is, I don't have time to meditate, I can't fit it into my life, I have kids to deal with in the morning, I got to make dinner at night. So if your company offers you a quiet room and encourages you, and this is middle management really needed to get behind it, push away from the computer, go use the quiet room, 10, 15 minutes, use an app. Huge believer in apps. I'm a big fan of 10% Happier, Calm.com, Headspace. They work. They're really good. That alone would raise up productivity. You know, people need a break, and they also need to learn how to focus on the here and now, which is very good for focusing on a task. And you know, we are in a attention deficit disorder era. There's a war for our attention. And we want to win the war for our attention. We want our attention to be where it wants to be, where we want it to be. It is not easy, but what other tool would even give you a fighting chance to achieve that other than mindfulness and meditation?
Do you ever practice meditation in reaction to a stressful situation, or do you just do it on a regular basis early in the morning or something?
That's a great question. I tell people all the time, I meditate every day, and I certainly encourage everyone to meditate every day for a lot of reasons. I mean, it's frequency, not duration, that matters in this practice. Even it's 5 minutes a day, right? So that's really, because you're really making a practice. You're building a foundation for yourself. So I do it to navigate my life, right, every day. But when the shit hits the fan, man, I am glad I've got to practice. You know, when my heart is aching, I think, Brent, didn't you call me and say, how are you dealing with the election of Donald Trump? I said, yes. He said, how does meditation help your reaction to that, to me, Democrat? Absolutely. No matter the trauma, no matter the crisis, I can't imagine not being able to go to the cushion with it. You see what I'm saying? It really is like, thank God I've got it in the times of crisis. I'll tell you right now, a personal thing. My twin sister, she's my stepsister, but we were born 9 days apart. She's dying of cancer. She really is. And my whole family went through a Christmas of this, dealing with this. I sit and I go into my heart space and I really take care of myself in that way, and I also send her loving thoughts, which is a whole different form of meditation called loving kindness, a kind of a cultivation meditation. So between taking care of myself and sending her loving kindness thoughts, so that, you know, it is a tool you want on board for when you really need it. It's a tool you want on board every day, no matter what. So.
Do you miss production?
No.
And do you think about translating some of this to some kind of media, of doing a series about this?
Yes and no. The last is so auspicious. It's a great question. I mean, I told somebody the other day, if I never had to listen to a terrified cable executive tell me why some moment in Act 3 of the 5th rough cut of Episode 3 isn't right, and if I don't fix it, he'll lose his job, because Hulu and Amazon and Netflix are killing them, that would be too soon. So I'm glad I'm out of the business. The last show I made, ironically, I didn't know it would be the last show I made, but it sort of was a perfect time to walk away. And I would recommend it to you. It's called Mindfulness Goes Mainstream. It's a show I helped produce for WGBH Boston. It's on the PBS network. It's a pledge break special, so you may see it come back. So the last TV show I made was about mindfulness. So, but I used to joke all the time, what could be worse television than watching somebody meditate? Think about it.
Hello, my name's Jordan, and my question is, when you were working on border wars, prior to mindfulness, did you find yourself able to identify with both sides of the story? Because you're working so closely with the Border Patrol, were you leaning into a black and white type of, it's strictly this is the right thing versus the dynamics of that?
Oh, another great question. Mike, let's just do this all day. I love this. I took pride in the fact that border wars was completely apolitical. As a matter of fact, we would never have won the trust of the agents and the officers if we hadn't told them and then followed up on our promise to them that we were going to play this straight down the middle. They are a political football down there. Now more than ever. I mean, I finished that show in 2012. That was 6 years ago. It's only worse as we know. I mean, think about it. The government is shut down right now because of this thing. I know these agents and officers are, losing their minds over this. I'm not saying that they all, we never talk politics down there, ever. As a matter of fact, I had to fire a sound man who wouldn't follow the edict of never talking politics to the agents and the officers. So I also took a lot of pride in the fact that the show, we tried to have the show as best as we could do, show the complexity. There really is no black and white at all. And everyone who thinks in black and white terms is missing the point. I never, frankly, thought we'd have a president who would do and say things that I used to joke about. I used to joke about, some people actually think we should just seal this border, just cut this, just seal the border to take care of these problems of migrants and drugs and so forth. I said, that's impossible. Mexico is our third largest trading partner in the world. We're talking about, $67 billion of trade. Well, he just talked about sealing the border. So I used to talk about folks who were so nutty they would suggest that. I never imagined the commander-in-chief would suggest that. So you can imagine, my head explodes. But to answer more of your questions, I love these cops. And it's really funny because I'm kind of basically a hippie, or I was a hippie. I'm a big cop lover because I know their sacrifice, their professionalism, the danger that they're in, the stress they are in with their families, with their friends. It is just such a difficult job. As you've heard, when the shit hits the fan, people run away. They run towards gunfire. They run towards the problems. I can't say enough about them, and I really do love them, and I couldn't do this work if I didn't. At the same time, your heart aches for the migrants who are coming up here. I'm talking about the cartel. They're definitely a problem. But I'm talking about the kind of folks that we see coming up these caravans, meaning in the sense that if your house was on fire, you'd grab your kids and run. Well, in Guatemala and El Salvador and Honduras, their house is on fire. I'm not saying you take the whole population, but I will say this, and I don't get political, except now I can afford to get a little political because border wars is in my rearview mirror. But, I really did believe in what President Obama was talking about and was passed the Senate, actually, before the Tea Party ruined it in the House. Comprehensive immigration reform is comprehensive. It meant you could bring people out of the shadows and give them any set of rules you wanted to. Let's say you told them they all had to learn English and go to a parole officer and show their English proficiency. You could deport them if they weren't learning it. You could have done any set to give people status, any status. This 12 million people in the shadows doesn't help anyone, right? So I'd love to talk more about it, but I can see Mike in my peripheral vision. So anyway.
As it gets into the Obama-Trump conversation.
That's right, exactly. I'm sorry. I never get to talk to this many people about politics. Anyway, thank you again for taking all of this in. It's a lot to take in, and for your flexibility with the fire alarm. I mean, that's going to make a great story years from now. Thanks again.
Thank you, Nick. Let me get a picture with everybody here. And I got to say, I'm really proud. I mean, you were around so many drugs, right in arm's distance, and you didn't just do those. You chose meditation. I'm very proud of you. Very, very proud.